joined the excavation team straight out of university, thrilled beyond words to work at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Most of my peers were stuck in labs, or stuck cataloging pottery shards in dim basements. But me? I was walking through stone corridors carved thousands of years ago, touching history with my own hands. At first, it was everything I dreamed of. The scale of the place was overwhelming. The air still, heavy, carrying the faint smell of dust and something older, something I couldn't place. Every corridor seemed to hold secrets, every shadow another discovery waiting to be made. But then, things changed. It started small. Distances didn't make sense. I would pace 20 steps down one corridor, turn back, and somehow end up 50 paces from where I'd started. I blamed fatigue, poor lighting, and even dehydration. My colleagues laughed it off. Labyrinth effect, they called it. The pyramid's geometry was disorienting, they said. Angles and acoustics tricked the mind. But I knew what I felt. The walls shifted. To prove it, I carried chalk. A childish impulse, maybe, but necessary. As I walked, I left marks behind. Neat slashes on the limestone, little arrows pointing my way back. Except they didn't stay put. I'd leave 3 marks, then turn a corner, only to see the same 3 slashes staring at me from ahead, as if the walls had moved to place them there. Sometimes my marks multiplied, spreading like veins across the stone. Other times they vanished entirely. I stopped sleeping well. In dreams, I saw endless passages folding over each other, closing in. The chalk marks spelled things I didn't want to read, words I didn't write. Still, I said nothing. I couldn't risk being pulled from the project. One evening, after the others packed up, I stayed behind. My excuse was to double-check some measurements. In truth, I needed proof. I needed to show myself I wasn't insane. Torch in hand, chalk in pocket, I entered the passageways alone. The silence pressed against me. The further I went, the less I could hear the outside world. No muffled voices, no footsteps. Just the sound of my own breathing bouncing back too slowly, as if the air itself dragged. I marked the walls carefully, deliberately. 1, 2, 3. A trail to follow back. But as I pressed forward, the marks began to shift again. Not vanish this time, not multiply. They rearranged. A curve here, a line bent there, turning slashes into letters. My torchlight flickered. I wiped sweat from my forehead, thinking it was a trick of the eye, until the letters formed a word. My name. I froze, my throat dry, staring at the letters scrawled across the stone in chalk that looked exactly like my hand had written it. But I hadn't. The walls seemed to pulse, narrowing in, the limestone damp beneath my fingers. I stepped back, heart pounding, and the air shifted. The passage stretched, my torch beam couldn't reach the end anymore. I ran. I didn't care where, didn't care how. I just ran, scraping my shoulders against stone that shouldn't have been that close, gasping as the floor tilted under my boots. The air grew heavier, pressing into my lungs like sand. When I finally stumbled back into the main chamber, hours had passed. My colleagues were furious, demanding to know where I'd been. I told them I got lost. They laughed, called me green, a rookie. I said nothing about the chalk. But that night, in the tent, I checked my tools. My chalk wasn't in my pocket anymore. It was on the table, broken into pieces. And one piece had been used, worn flat, covered in limestone dust. Scrawled across the notebook where I kept my field notes, in the same neat strokes as before, was my name. Again and again and again. I wanted to quit. I should have quit. But curiosity is stronger than fear. That's the curse of being an archaeologist. You can't stop digging, even when you should. The next day, I forced myself back into the corridors. This time, I carried no chalk. I needed to prove the pyramid was just stone, that the rest had been stress and exhaustion. But the walls didn't need chalk anymore. They already knew my name. Everywhere I turned, the limestone bore faint scratches, grooves I hadn't noticed before. At first random, then familiar. Letters, words, my name, etched into the pyramid itself. Not fresh, not new, but old, as though it had been there long before me. I stumbled back, dizzy, and pressed my palm to the stone. The grooves were deep, worn, polished smooth from centuries. Someone had carved my name into the pyramid thousands of years before I was born. That was the last day I worked there. I left without explanation, without collecting my final pay. My colleagues thought I'd had a breakdown. Maybe they were right. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of corridors again. They stretch longer every time. And on my bedroom walls, faint in the plaster, I swear I see scratches. At first random, then familiar. My name. If you ever find yourself wandering old ruins, remember, some corridors don't lead where you think they do. Some stones remember your name. So before curiosity pulls you too far, like, comment and share to warn others, and hit subscribe before the shadows stretch across the floor. Because you never know what's waiting beneath the walls, whispering, watching, and calling you back inside. I thought I'd seen it all by the time we reached the king's chamber. Dust, relics, hieroglyphs, faded into oblivion. The pyramid wasn't just a monument, it was a tomb, a machine, a place designed to test the limits of human faith and human fear. But the stone was something else. We were cataloging blocks along the chamber's walls, noting variations, chisel marks, anything that might give us insight into how this impossible structure was built. Most were the same. Cold, unyielding, humming faintly with the silence of centuries. Until I touched that slab. It was warmer than the others. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. My hands were calloused from weeks of work, and sometimes the nerves played tricks in the constant dark. But then it pulsed. Faintly, gently, like a heartbeat buried deep within the stone. I jerked my hand back, unsettled. One of the others, a senior archaeologist named Hassan, asked if I was all right. I laughed it off, said it was nothing. But curiosity clawed at me. When no one was watching, I pressed my palm against the slab again. The pulse was still there. I leaned closer, resting my ear against the limestone, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. Not an echo, not the rush of blood in my head, but slow, deliberate breaths. The sound of air moving through lungs, drawn in and released. My skin prickled. I backed away too fast, stumbling over my own boots. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of acoustic trick. The pyramid was full of them. Corridors carried whispers from one end to another, sounds warped into something uncanny. That had to be it. But the others, they knew. I caught them stealing glances at the slab when they thought no one was looking. Hassan got close once. Close enough that his expression changed. His face went pale, jaw tight. He stepped away without a word. When I asked him later, he dismissed me. Said I was overtired. Said there was nothing unusual. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. From then on, the team avoided me. They wouldn't let me work near that wall. Wouldn't speak to me unless they had to. As though acknowledging what I'd found would make it real. Weeks passed. I couldn't stay away. One night, I returned alone. My torch threw weak light against the chamber, shadows crawling across the stone. I walked straight to the slab, my breath echoing louder than my footsteps. I pressed my hand against it again. This time it wasn't warm. It was cold. So cold my skin stung, frost biting into my palm. I froze, the light trembling in my hand. The surface of the stone glittered faintly in the torchlight, like ice forming in cracks that hadn't been there before. And then I noticed something worse. My breath was fogging the air, thick, white clouds rising and vanishing in front of me. But the chamber was perfectly dry. The temperature had never dropped low enough for condensation, not in the months we'd been inside. Still, my breath poured out, visible, rapid, panicked. I turned slowly, holding the torch higher. The rest of the room was clear. No mist, no cold. Only here, in front of the slab. Only here, where the stone had once breathed. A sound followed. Not a whisper, not a breath, but a sigh. Long, heavy, exhaled directly into my ear. I staggered back, torch nearly slipping from my hand, heart thundering in my chest. I shone the light wildly across the walls, across the ceiling, across the stone. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The next morning, the others found me sitting outside the chamber entrance. Torch long dead, hands trembling. I didn't tell them what happened. What would I say? That the pyramid itself was alive? That something behind those stones was trying to breathe through me? They wouldn't have believed me, but I noticed something. They never asked why I'd been in there overnight, never scolded me, never even mentioned it. They just looked at me strangely, as though I had crossed an invisible line, as though they'd been waiting for me to. I've left Egypt now. I swore I'd never return. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I wake with frost on my lips. My breath hangs in the air, misty and white, though the room is warm. And always, just at the edge of sleep, I hear it. That sigh, low and heavy, right beside me. I'd been working in the lower passages for weeks, mapping joints and taking measurements. The kind of tedious labor that makes you love the little triumphs. A new seam discovered, a perfectly preserved chisel mark, the way light from the lamp catches mica in the stone. The deeper you go in the Great Pyramid, the quieter the world becomes. Sound thins, as if the whole place is wrapped and muffled in wool. So when I found the doorway, I thought at first it was just another crawl space. A niche, maybe. A storage alcove carved for offerings no one could identify. It was late, my torch low, and my team long gone up to the service tent. The passage opened off a narrow corridor I'd walked past a dozen times. One moment there was limestone. The next, an archway I was sure hadn't been there that morning. The arch was plain, unadorned, and a breadth narrower than my shoulders. Beyond it, the torchlight showed 4 walls. Square. Close. The rock face black with age. No inscriptions. Nothing to mark it on the map. I stepped inside because that's what you do when you're an archaeologist and curiosity bites like a flea. The floor felt wrong. Not in temperature or texture. Wrong in an impossible way. The stone underfoot was steady at first, but when I dropped a pebble, the little habit you have to test an echo, to see how a room answers. The sound didn't come back. The pebble slipped from my fingers and vanished into nothing. No clack, no thud, just that single small sound swallowed. I stood there with my hand outstretched, watching the empty air where the pebble had fallen, thinking maybe it had ricocheted and I'd missed it. My torch beam searched the walls and corners, but the light never found any floor beneath the place where the pebble should have landed. Everything in me tensed. The human brain is clever and cowardly. It will invent reasons for what it cannot accept. Perhaps the pebble lodged somewhere, Perhaps the floor was a trapdoor. Perhaps a deposit of soft sand muted the sound. I told myself these things out loud, because there's a kind of courage in reasoning. But reasoning felt cheap in that room, as if my words were fragile bones. I marked the doorway on my pad, then went back to the tent and wrote it down in the official log. The entry was small. Unregistered chamber, coordinates X-X. I told one of the other guys, Karim, in passing. He laughed and called me a dramatist, said, "The pyramid plays tricks on green eyes." We drank tea and joked about it, and for a while I could pretend the joke held. But the feeling of that swallowed sound followed me like a smell. The next morning, when I led a small party back, Hassan and 2 others from the team, the archway was gone. The blank limestone wall was intact and unbroken, seamless and ordinary. Hassan frowned at my map, then at the place where the doorway had been. "You were tired," he said. "You should get some rest." When I tried to point out the markings I'd made on the floor, they weren't there. They had been, the night before. I was sure of it. "Maybe you misread your coordinates," one of the others suggested, too politely. They mapped the wall in front of them. Nothing. The stone was solid. There was no crack, no seam. When Hassan told me to stop wasting time, his voice had gone flat, like a recorder skipping. I felt foolish, like someone who'd wandered into a play and expected the scenery to behave. They took my notepad, photocopied the relevant pages, and politely suggested a few days off. Exhaustion could do terrible things. People have to be protected from themselves. They said it with a kind of mechanical kindness that made me think they already knew what I didn't. Some things were better left alone, but the memory of the swallowed pebble wouldn't let me rest. That night I dreamed of the chamber. In the dream, I stood at the archway again, torch in hand, and a darkness like a mouth yawned below my boots. I leaned forward, and the top edge of the abyss was just out of reach, as if the world had been cut away. My heart hammered until it was a drum, and then something rose beneath me. Not a hand, but a pressure, like water pressing upward. The sensation of ascent, slow and inescapable. I woke with my fingers numb, as if something had gripped them from below. Over the next week, I cataloged the rest of the lower passages. I kept my head down, avoided the intersections where the corridor met that blank wall. But the dream grew bolder. Each night, the abyss climbed a little higher in my sleep, a slow tide that pushed the line of darkness to my knees, then my waist, then my chest. The waking world began to blur. Shadows at the periphery of my vision that would vanish when I turned. Voices that seemed to echo down a corridor that didn't exist. Finally, on a rain-soured afternoon when the camp was lethargic, I went back. Alone. I told myself I would prove 2 things: that I could be brave and that my mind had not unhinged itself completely. I walked the corridor, counting steps, listening for the rhythm of my own boots. At the spot where the arch had been, the wall yielded, faint like the memory of a seam. This time, it was not a full doorway, but a hairline fracture, a line that hummed under my fingers. I pressed my palm to the seam and felt a distant cold, the sort that crawls up the spine. There was no floor yet, only an edge, a suggestion. I leaned over, peering into the black, and for a moment the torch showed not the abyss, but the slow, wavering images of other places. A courtyard of sun, a market whose voices became childlike, a boat on black water. They blurred when I tried to focus, folding in on themselves like paper. I dropped another pebble. This time there was sound, but wrong. Not a single soft thud, but a long, sobbing fall, a wet staccato that resonated as if in water. The sound spiraled up, multiplied, like a chorus of small stones drowning. Behind me, the corridor hummed, and then from below came a faint rhythm, like something testing the edge. My torch flickered. I thought of calling to the others, of running, but something in the voice inside me said there was no point. The abyss wanted an audience, and I had given it mine. I backed away slowly and, hands shaking, closed the seam with a slab of chalk I happened to have. Ridiculous, symbolic, utterly primal. The wall sealed as if satisfied, and for a beat the air lightened. Then, in a sound I felt more than heard, something below shifted. The tap, tap, tap rose into a slow scrape and then silence. When I reached the tent, Hassan was waiting. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just sat across from me and smiled, sharp and small. "You work too much," he said. "Take a long rest. Go home, see your family. Come back if you like. Or don't." I left. I caught the first flight I could, carrying in my pockets the small tools I'd used, the maps I'd drawn. At home, the night stretched, and though I tried to soothe myself with ordinary tasks, the dreams continued. The abyss rose in them still, inexorable. Each night it climbed a little higher until it reached my chin, and then, always, I woke before I fell. Sometimes, walking down the street, I feel the floor's sound change. A dropped coin seems swallowed. A child's laugh loses its echo. At odd moments, my hands tremble, and I think I can hear that far, wet fall from below. Not outside, but under the soles of my feet. I know what people will say. Hallucination, exhaustion, a brain pushed too far in a place that plays with perception. The team will insist the archway never existed. They will show calendars, duty rosters, angles on maps. They will be right in their way. The data will not include my fear. But I keep the margin of that map in my pocket, a photocopy smudged where my palm pressed too hard. When I run my fingers over the lines, I can still feel the vibration of that fall, like a chord struck under the skin. And in the quiet of my apartment, late at night, when the pipes groan and the world inhales, I dream of standing at the edge and of something patient below, rising. Each time it climbs closer, each time it reaches further. And every morning, I wake with the hollow taste of stone in my mouth. I had spent years dreaming of moments like this, standing in the shadows of the Great Pyramid, torchlight flickering across walls that hadn't felt human hands in millennia. Fresh out of university, I joined the excavation team, hungry for discovery, for a brush with history so real it could leave your skin tingling. But nothing in any textbook or lecture had prepared me for the black granite sarcophagus we found in the lower chambers. It wasn't listed on any map, not in our plans, not in prior surveys. Just there, a block of stone, perfectly rectangular, polished smooth as if it had been drawn from the earth yesterday instead of thousands of years ago. No carvings, no hieroglyphs, no faint traces of paint. The stone was so black it didn't reflect torchlight. It didn't shimmer or glimmer. It absorbed it, swallowing the flames and leaving the corners of the chamber unnaturally dark. I remember the first time I leaned over it. Only curiosity, only a small tilt of the head. I wanted to see the inside, to confirm it was empty, to finally breathe a sigh of relief and say, nothing here. Just stone. But the moment I peered inside, the air changed. It wasn't temperature, though the chill was sudden and creeping, like frost settling under my skin. It was the sound. A murmur, soft, rising from the stone itself. Thousands of voices layered together, a wave pressing against my eardrums. I staggered back, torch trembling in my grip. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't language, not words, not syllables. Just tone. Hum. Pitch. A rising and falling like thought unformed. It was as if the sarcophagus itself was thinking, and somehow my mind had tuned into it. I told myself I'd imagined it. Exhaustion, The long days, the endless dust, the isolation of being deep underground, cut off from sunlight. Surely my mind was playing tricks. But then the voices shifted. They weren't just a murmur anymore. They were circling, whispering around me, bouncing between walls that had been silent for centuries. They pressed against my skull, not audibly but in memory, in sensation, like something trying to push its consciousness into mine. I stumbled out of the chamber, gasping, heart hammering. The other archaeologists laughed it off, asked if I'd hit my head, suggested I take a break. But I could see it in their eyes. The way Hassan avoided the corner where the sarcophagus sat. The way Karim flinched at my mere mention of it. They had heard it too. Everyone had. Everyone but them was too polite or too afraid to admit it. I returned the next day, torch clutched tight, mind battling both terror and obsession. I had to know what it wanted. I had to know if it was a trick, a natural phenomenon, some echo caused by trapped air and limestone resonance. Rational thought was my lifeline, and I clung to it as I leaned over the edge of the sarcophagus again. And they whispered. The same tones, rising and falling like waves. But this time, I noticed a rhythm beneath the chaos. A pattern. Like someone drawing their fingers along the inside walls. Not accidental. Intentional. I tried to step back, but my knees felt like lead. My chest tightened. The sound. It wasn't sound. It was pressure. A presence. The sarcophagus wasn't just empty. It was waiting. Listening. Aware. And I had crossed the line. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my torch, and the murmuring grew louder, closer, pressing on my temples. My breath caught, lungs heaving. Every instinct screamed to run, but the stairs leading up to the surface were impossibly far, and the chamber seemed to stretch like rubber, distance elongating beyond reason. And then I heard it clearly. A voice, singular, not like the other tones, not a chorus. Sharp, cold, direct. Get back inside! My torch clattered to the floor. I bolted, scrambling up the corridors, up the stone stairways, up to the light of the entrance, where the others were waiting. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. I was shaking too badly to explain. Even now, years later, far from Egypt, I cannot escape it. At night, I wake to the whispers behind my eyelids. They gather there, pressing closer. A dense, oppressive crowd of soundless voices. I close my eyes, but they still speak, still press against my mind. I hear them in the hum of electricity, in the whistle of wind across my apartment window. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night to my phone buzzing, a faint vibration. No message, no number. And behind it, the murmuring begins again, like a thread unraveling inside my skull. I know what they want. I feel it in the deep, twisting pit of my stomach. They are patient. They do not forget. They do not tire. They want me to return to the granite, to the black, to the chamber that was never on any map. I have dreams too, vivid and terrifying. In them, I stand at the mouth of the sarcophagus, and the voices press forward, not threatening, not angry, just insistent. They coil around my body, tighten, pull. I see the black granite opening like a throat, reaching for me. I step back, but the ground beneath me shifts, tilts, and I fall. Falling into the chamber that has no bottom. And then, in that endless dark, the voices are mine too. I try to resist. I try to remind myself. It's stone. It's impossible. It's imagination. But every night, when the world grows quiet, the whispers return. They're patient. They're endless. And they say the same thing. Now, clearly. Every night, every time the shadows gather behind my eyelids, get back inside. I haven't. Not yet. but I can feel the pull, and I'm terrified I won't be able to resist forever.